Okay, so welcome. My name is Gina Clonan. I'm the founding president of the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. For nearly 3 decades, the Hall has worked to discover and share the stories of women. Our various educational platforms acknowledge the individual and the collective feminine voice. There's no more important time than now to talk and listen. This will be a half-hour intimate and informative chat, followed by 15 minutes of your questions, which we encourage you to submit at any time during this webinar by simply clicking the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. I'll try to get to as many as possible. Our goal is simple, a virtual gathering to talk about today's important issues. We hope this will be a useful source of information while offering up some helpful takeaways. Today's webinar is entitled Social Justice, Women on the Front Lines, because that is who we have with us today. My guests are the Connecticut women fighting for justice on issues that impact all of our lives. They are also the 2021 Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame Spotlight Recipients. I'm honored to have 5 of the 8 awardees with me today. Please welcome founder and president of Community Healing Network, Enola, founding leader of the Connecticut Health Foundation, Pat Baker, executive director of the Charter Oak Cultural Center, Rabbi Donna Berman, founder, president, and co-director of Bridgeport Generation now, Callie Heilmann, and activist for social and economic justice, Marilyn Ondrasik. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So let's begin by having Thank you. Let's begin by having each one of you give a brief summation of the organization, your organization, and its focus. Can we start with you, Pat?
Certainly. I was the founding CEO and executive director for the Connecticut Health Foundation, which is a private independent foundation serving Connecticut, who fundamentally believes that everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, has the right to optimize their health. And in doing so, we aspire to a vision where children of color in the coming generation do not have to face racial and ethnic health disparities. And we do that by advocating and working towards systems change through utilizing our grant making, policy, and strategic communication. So our work is focused on expanding health coverage and access, improving care delivery, linking the community to clinical care for whole health, and ultimately supporting advocacy and leadership initiatives that make all of that happen.
Thank you, Pat. And Callie, tell us a little bit about Bridgeport Generation now.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. Bridgeport Generation Now, we are a member-based grassroots organization in Bridgeport, Connecticut, founded in 2016. We have over 300 members and 90% of our members are residents of Bridgeport. We are women-led, multiracial group, intergenerational, with the mission of strengthening civic engagement in ourselves and in our communities. So our vision is to use the tools of civic engagement and community organizing to dismantle systemic corruption and systemic racism in the city of Bridgeport, so that we can build collectively the just, equitable, and livable city that we know is possible. So together we work on grassroots policy, research, we advocate for democracy. Our members stand up on the issues that they care about, and we engage and enact people-led change.
Thank you, Callie. And Enola, can you tell us about the Community Healing Foundation Network?
Community Healing Network, happy to do so. It's great to be here. Community Healing Network is mobilizing Black people all across the African diaspora to heal from and extinguish the lie of white superiority and Black inferiority, which we see as the root cause of the dehumanization of Black people, the root cause of everything we see on the news when we wonder why, after all this time, with all the constitutional amendments, all the legislation, everything, what is it that keeps us from fully recognizing the humanity of Black people? It is that lie told centuries ago to justify the enslavement of Africans and the exploitation of the African continent. It is still with us under the surface of everything that we see that relates to Black people across the world. And our goal is to free our children of that lie so that we can reach our fullest potential and move beyond surviving to flourishing.
Thank you, Enola. Marilyn, are you engaged with an organization presently, or most of your work has come a little bit before today? Can you tell me?
Most of it has come a little bit before today. I'm retired.
Okay, all right. So then you have a lot to contribute to today's conversation. I have a lot of questions for you. Can't imagine anyone in Hartford not knowing Charter Oak, but maybe there are some. So Donna, please tell us. Your mic is off.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be among all of you, such wonderful, distinguished women. I'm the executive director of the Charter Oak Cultural Center. This is my 20th anniversary. Thank you. We are a multicultural arts center doing the work of social justice through the arts. And we do it basically in 3 ways. We have all kinds of multicultural performances, dance performances and concerts and readings and lectures and theater and exhibits. And we bring people together to enjoy the arts. And we never turn anybody away who can't afford the price of a ticket. And we have a Youth Arts Institute where we are able to provide 1,000 Hartford children with a very high level free arts education from age 6 to 18. And we hope to eventually go from 0 to 18. And we have 3 programs for the homeless community. We started Connecticut's first street paper, which is a newspaper written by people in the homeless community 12 years ago. And we have a program called Eats of the Street, where we put pots of organic vegetable plants on the streets of Hartford. And we hire and train people in the homeless community to take care of them. And anybody in need can pick the vegetables when they're ripe. And we started a school for people in the homeless community. And when they graduate from our school, they're eligible for a full scholarship to Goodwin University.
Wow, amazing work, Donna. Well, let's move right along and get into some of the deeper issues. Emotional emancipation, that may be to some a new term. Enola, please enlighten us.
It may be some a new term, but it's something that people within the community of African descended people have been asking for, talking about, calling for generations. Marcus Garvey, who was the Pan-Africanist who did a wonderful job in the 1920s bringing African people from around the world together to build his movement for the United Negro Improvement Association. Carter G. Woodson was talking about it when he talked about the miseducation of the Negro. Stephen Biko talked about it when he said that the greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Dr. King talked about it when he said that any movement for the Negro's freedom that overlooks the necessity of psychological freedom is only waiting to be buried. People have been calling for emotional emancipation, that is freedom as we define it, from the lie of white superiority and Black inferiority, this notion that really creates a hierarchy of humanity with white people at the very top, standing for everything that is good and true and wonderful, and Black people at the very, very bottom. And then, people find themselves somewhere along that continuum. And the closer you are to whiteness, the better you are. And the closer you are to Blackness, the less you are. This is what we are talking about when we talk about emotional emancipation, is freeing ourselves as people of African ancestry from this lie, again, which was created to justify the enslavement of African people. If they're not human, if they're less than human, if you throw them out of the circle with humanity by the telling of the lie, you can do whatever you want to do to them. And we can see that that's been happening over the centuries, right up until today. That George Floyd moment brought into very stark relief the dehumanization of Black people. And we are saying this has been going on for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're now seeing it in real time because of the technology, but the need of the moment is to recognize the lie casts Black people out of the circle. We are, through this movement for emotional emancipation, reclaiming our rightful place in the circle.
Thank you so much. That was very enlightening. Let's say the pandemic has spotlighted the phenomenal disparities in healthcare. Pat, has that light helped or hindered?
Well, yes, I think it has helped and is hardly sufficient. And I would be remiss if I didn't remind people in Connecticut that huge disparities existed for people of color before the pandemic. The fact of the matter is a baby born to a Black mother is 4 times more likely to die before their first birthday than a baby born to a white mother. The fact that Black African Americans are 4 times more likely to experience lower extremity amputation than their white counterparts, and 2 times more likely to die. All of those were statistics that we lived with before the pandemic. I think what the pandemic provided is a spotlight on these kind of inherent disparities and the painful costs in mortality of those disparities. But it has to be more than a headline. We cannot, as residents of Connecticut, allow it to be the story of the day, but rather the action for today, tomorrow, and the future. We have to affect systems change if we're going to change not just how we prepare for a pandemic, but the health outcomes for people of color in Connecticut. And there's much work to be done on that front. So yes, I'm glad to highlight the pain that people have suffered, but now let's fix it.
Absolutely. 30 years ago, many saw multiculturalism as the embrace of an inclusive, diverse society in answer to social problems. Today, multiculturalism has become a proxy for other social and political issues like immigration, identity, political disenchantment. Donna, can multicultural arts effectively explore these burning issues of today?
I'm done. I don't think there's any issue that the arts can explore. And the interesting thing about how the arts approach these issues is they engage both the right and the left hemisphere of the brain. And I think that they really, and they circumvent kind of the rhetoric and the defensive system that a lot of us put up when it comes time to explore new ideas or new perspectives. We can kind of, just kind of the opposite and say, no, I'm not going to go there. But the arts are this gentle way of inviting people in to look at things differently. And I think that they get to the heart of the matter and they bring us to our hearts. And it's always, the most important thing is always not only to approach problems and issues and challenges with the mind, but also always with the heart.
Thank you. As a former docent at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, I couldn't agree with you more. Our state's most populated city is also its poorest. Callie, how is the Bridgeport community meeting the challenge posed by both those stats?
Quick correction. Hartford is actually the poorest city in Connecticut, but Bridgeport has a very high rate of poverty as well. Most of Connecticut cities do. And so in thinking about this question, I think that for me, as a wealthy white woman, I'm not going to speak on behalf of poor people of Bridgeport. I'm going to say that I stand in solidarity with the people that I'm in community with who are living in low income and in poverty conditions. And I will say that, poverty in Connecticut is by design. We are the wealthiest state in the wealthiest nation in the entire world. And so the question of, what should the people in Bridgeport be doing about the conditions of their lives is a question that, organizers and people on the ground in grassroots movement building in Bridgeport, not just in Bridgeport Generation now, but in other groups as well, work on. But this question too, I think, as a state, we have to ask, what are people in Westport doing? What are people in New Canaan doing? What are people in Darien doing? Because ground zero for income inequality and racial disparities and segregation is Westport, Darien, New Canaan. And so there's I grew up in Hartford, and so these conditions are not new. If you've grown up in Connecticut, you know, we all know that that is the lived reality here. And I think like out of George Floyd's murder, Jameen, my co-director, and I often talk about the world, the world splitting open, the everything being revealed, and an entire nation stepping into action. And in Connecticut, there is a call, and it's coming up from people on the ground to say like the time is now to start addressing through real meaningful structural change in our lawmaking and in our policy making to address the two Connecticut's.
Thank you, Callie. The time is now for real change. Millions of Americans first understood what a community organizer meant when then presidential candidate for President Barack Obama released his resume. All of our guests today can claim that title, but Marilyn, you've lived in more than one community and in more than one region. Tell us how the issues of social justice here in Connecticut compare or they don't.
I think the issues of social justice are often the same across all kinds of communities, be they the quality of education, lack of affordable or accessible healthcare, lack of affordable housing, community violence. How they differ is in how they look and play out in various communities based on community culture, based on the demographics of community. And that actually pushes the issue of the solutions then need to be tailor-made to each individual community based on those factors.
Thank you. I cannot have a webinar these days without talking about one of the greatest crises in the world, which is climate. I've made a commitment to refer to myself no longer as just a feminist, but as a climate feminist. I personally am committed to address the climate crisis in everything I do. Social injustice is predicted to be off the charts as the earth heats up. Can you tell me, any one of you, I leave this to the whole group, how are your organizations preparing? Enola, are we thinking about the climate crisis?
I'm thinking about the value system that has brought us to this moment in human history. I'm thinking about the Eurocentric narrative that we've all been living under, that is premised on self-indulgence, instant gratification, and materialism, and it really has no limits, no boundaries, no stopping line. I'm thinking about the need to change that value system, to make room for, in our terms, the African value system, which is a much more interconnected recognition of the fact that in Ubuntu terms, I am because we are, I cannot be me without you. So we are thinking about it as a movement for emotional emancipation as we peel away from the Western value system that has at its heart our oppression, right? So we don't want to be part of that anymore. We're not, going to be part of that narrative anymore. But we are finding a new narrative, and it's actually a renewed narrative because we're going back to the African way of looking at things. So for us, our pathway to healing is reconnecting with the values of Ubuntu and Sawubona, which in fact are the values that make way for sustainability. So that's the way in which we're thinking about it.
That's amazing. And Marilyn, you're out in Seattle, which is one of the most progressive areas addressing the issues in the climate crisis. Your thoughts?
I think there are myriad ways the climate crisis can be addressed. Here in Seattle, I am constantly amazed that you almost have no garbage because everything is recycled, including compost. Things that go in garbage are styrofoam, which has been banned in Seattle. That, and there's a lot of trees. There are efforts to plant more trees. And, buses are electric, everything is electric out here. The city has made a really good effort. But one of the things I also want to say is I think green jobs really matter, and that is a lot of the future coming up. One of the most recent organizations I worked for is Greater Bridgeport Community Enterprises, which hires those with barriers to work for green jobs in collecting used mattresses and used books, deconstructing them and recycling the component parts. And this is just an example of green jobs that can make sure we're not knocking down more trees, we're not taking them down, we're not having to use energy to produce more things, but we are recycling and reusing materials. There are so many ways that if you just look around you, we can all make a big difference.
Thank you, Marilyn. Anyone else want to talk a little bit about being green?
I was going to say, I'm going to speak as I'm retired from the Connecticut Health Foundation just recently, but the foundation really sees policy and change as a mechanism to really change some of those structural problems. And one of the things, if you recently talked about in the Journal of Climate, was the impact of redlining, probably one of the most discriminatory, destructive policies that have been embedded in our housing policy since the 40s, if maybe not before, and certainly after the GI Bill. What they found in their most recent study is that 108 of the United States urban areas already are suffering 2 to 6 degrees Celsius increase in heat than non-redlined areas, which speaks to the impact on health and well-being, particularly asthma. And that's where I think about it is the fact of the matter in Connecticut, when compared to the white peers, Black teens and children are showing up at EDs at 5.5 times the rate of their white counterparts, Hispanics 4.5 times. All of this is interconnected, and we have to think about all of the different policy levers available to us to make and reverse as soon as possible some of these policies that have institutionalized and made structural impact on not only the climate, but those most vulnerable to the impact of climate change.
And Callie, it appears that you and your generation and those to come after you are facing the climate crisis as the single most important issue for them. What would you say to the idea of climate feminists, and what more can we do or your organizations are doing?
Yes, well, in Bridgeport, that environmental injustice is real. It's lived. PSEG operated a coal plant up until this year in Bridgeport, which lives right on the site of Little Liberia, which is the free community of color that existed in Bridgeport from the early 1800s until about 1840, made up of free people of color, emancipated, formerly enslaved people, and native indigenous people. And so that coal plant sort of is in stark, like, spiritual, what Enola lifted up, like that spiritual malfeasance or cancer is living right here in Bridgeport. And we talk a lot about at Bridgeport Generation now how our democracy is broken because of the systemic corruption that's been embedded in our local government for so long, and how it becomes really hard to address issues locally through policy making, through the levers that we have for change when democracy doesn't work. And so the people of Bridgeport have essentially been shut out from decision making over the direction of their city and their lives for generations. And so it's not that we can't do two things at the same time, but in order to get the livable community that we need, we really have to first uproot a system that is benefiting a very small group of people who continue to just hoard power and resources at the top.
Well said. And Donna, and an organization named after a fearless tree and roots, can you say something about the Hartford community and environmentalism?
That's a really good point. Well, I want to say at a very practical level, we just bought the building next door to ours, and we're going to make it as green as possible, and we're going to create a beautiful campus. But we'll continue to educate and inspire people about climate activism through the arts. And one of the things that we want to explore is the connection between the denigration of women and the denigration of the environment. I mean, we are denigrating Mother Earth. And the connection there, I think, is a very, very important connection to keep in mind. And those two things, as we do work on both of those things, they're going to come together and bring healing. We're very committed to that.
It is, and I'm glad to hear that. It leads me into another question, which just disappeared from my screen, so you'll pardon me. But as women, and all of us here today, feminists, we've experienced firsthand social justice on many levels. And Donna, this is to your point. How has that experience aided in your individual concentrations? Speak to me about being a woman, being on the front lines of social justice, having experienced inequality most of our lives in one way or another. Marilyn, would you like to say a few words about that?
I think that I've worked primarily with low and moderate income families in Bridgeport. And I think that every day these families experience social injustice. And if all of us just look around and pay attention, we will see ways that we can change in our daily lives, in our community. And I absolutely agree with Pat. We need to be involved to support policy changes. So I think there is so much that all of us can do on the little level and also on the big level. And we shouldn't forget those two poles as well as everything in between.
Thank you. And Enola, as a lawyer and a scholar, you've written extensively about the lie of white supremacy. Is there any hope for the 1619 Project to make its way into curricula across the nation? And for those who maybe not be familiar with that, what it is, would you touch upon it?
Well, I am aware that Nicole Hannah-Jones did a wonderful job of helping to focus us in 2019 during the 400th anniversary of the first recorded forced arrival of Africans in the United States on the alternate history, right? The alternate history, the history that has been hidden, the history that is the truth versus the lie. And so I see the 1619 Project as part of many projects designed to correct our miseducation, many projects designed to help us understand the truth in a world in which we have been covered with lies. I think it is good at every turn to do our very best to correct the record. I don't spend a lot of time attempting to change the public school system, because I think that the public school system, as Zora Neale Hurston told us years ago, is designed to carry out the lie. So I'm not going to kind of waste my time doing that. I certainly don't want to put down anyone who wants to focus on that. We're much more interested in getting, again, as I said at the beginning, at the root cause of the things that Callie talked about, at the things that Pat talked about, things that Donna talked about as well, and Marilyn as well. I mean, the fundamental imbalances in our system are from the very beginning, and they are rooted in our view, in this hierarchy of humanity. Until we deal with that, a value system that is built on that, we can do all kinds of things around the edges, around the margins, and we'll continue to stay right where we are.
Thank you, Enola. I couldn't help but talk a little bit more about education, as the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame is not only a store of history, but we also produce educational programming. And our mission is to create it free. Donna, free programming has been your focus. How crucial is that for equal educational opportunities?
think it's absolutely essential. In our case, we're providing a free arts education, and the arts, cultivate the imagination and creativity and critical thinking skills and even math and reading skills. And we feel that the arts are a human right, not a luxury, and that everybody deserves to be exposed to them. But the problem is that in our country, the participation in the arts is literally very expensive. And so, who gets that extra measure of excitement and exploration, but people who can afford it. And so that's why our mission is to make sure that children who otherwise would not be exposed to the arts and people who otherwise would not be exposed to the arts are able to do so, because the arts really bestow so many gifts. And one of those gifts is to bring people together. So how ironic then that they're only available to certain people. They need to be available to everybody, and it changes lives.
Absolutely. I want to remind those online with us today that you can submit your questions at any time by simply clicking the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen or joining on the chat, as I see that most of you have. We're going to get to those questions in a few moments. We touched on the inequities in our healthcare system, which are so prominent these days as we continue to work our way through this pandemic. As a baby boomer and now sandwiched between the needs of my aging mother and my young grandchildren, I see ageism as a growing problem. Pat, would you agree?
Absolutely. And it speaks to not only ageism, a growing problem, but the role of women as caretakers and how we have been basically raised and embraced the role of caretaker for our children and our parents and our grandchildren. And what I am aware of with this aging population, particularly, is how we have not addressed real, I think, structural policy change for the young or the old. There isn't universal access to childcare or supports for childcare. And in fact, besides Medicare, there isn't an aging policy in this country. And therefore, it gets thrust back on family to deal with balancing all of those. And who has been affected most? And I guess it brings me back to the pandemic. Women have been hurt more than any other group. That in terms of economic security, job security, because they had to withdraw from the workforce to take care of either their children or their parents. And so it really speaks to what are the values and what are our values based on, to what Enola says. What is the value structure and how are we supporting the health and well-being of all? And as the population ages more and more, we're going to be confronted and stressed. And I worry about women and how they're going to take this on without a platform and help throughout the country.
Exactly. Well, here we are on Zoom, as we've been doing so for the past year and a half. Callie, at heart, you're a teacher. The pandemic underscored the digital divide. How can schools effectively address social injustices in their communities? And do you think they are?
I think that some schools do better than others, and that has to do with what kind of culture and value system is built from within the walls of the school. I think that our public education system is so fragmented, and that's by design. And that, when you look across Connecticut and the 169 separate municipalities with separate boards of educations and separate, separate property taxes that fund separate districts, it's very clear that we don't, in Connecticut, have a commitment to school being a safe place for everyone. And that we actually are very committed to school being dangerous for certain groups of kids. I think that, like Marilyn said, there's the things that we can do every day, and then there's the really big fights. And in a democracy, we're asked to live in both places. So your vote is the way to participate in the big stuff. And, you know, when we go into that voting booth, well, we don't do that really anymore, but, you know, there's a question of what am I saying? What am I joining in? What conversation am I joining in? And, you know, I think that for my whole life, Connecticut has never had a cohesive conversation about public education in a way that would be healing, safe, and loving for all students. And the time, you know, the time is now. You know, governors should run on education, let the legislature, you know. So I'll get off my soapbox. It's a big, a big thing, but certainly it's something that, you know, needs, it must change.
Thank you, Callie. I, for one, love to see your teacher identity come through. We're going to take a few questions now from our attendees. And also a member of the hall is on board to post a poll. I'm presuming, Michelle, I don't see it on my screen, but I'm hoping that you all can see it. And it's just 3 quick questions. We want to get your feedback, and we also want to know what things you'd like to see in the future on this monthly webinar series. So let's start with a question from Judy Villa. Would anyone comment on the anger and fear over CRT, which has been wrongly attributed to social justice curriculum in public schools? Would anyone like to take that on, critical race theory?
Well, I will comment. I'll have to move my poll over here. I'll finish my poll in a minute. This is, one is, and I think various speakers have mentioned it, we have not, and I wasn't long ago a history teacher, we have not taught the history of this country. How many of us were raised here reading about Tulsa or Juneteenth or et cetera? The reality is we're struggling, and what we hope to achieve is a robust, well-rounded curriculum that includes all of the diverse populations, women, African Americans, Native Americans in our history. What has been used as a political club is critical race theory, which is in fact usually part of a law school curriculum. What we're trying to do in our schools is to give our children the best foundation for dealing and learning and respecting the diverse cultures and history, and help them navigate this world we hope to achieve. It is very sad that it has been reduced to now, as many things in our country have, to partisan politics as a way of a tool to gain power and disenfranchise and maintain white supremacy in many ways.
Thank you. Very well said. Would anyone else like to opine? All right, we're going to move on.
Could I say
Oh, sorry. Yes, Donna.
Well, and Enola has spoken so eloquently about the lie. And one of the truths about the lie is that a lot of people are very invested in it and really profit from it. And so, you know, one of the patterns we see in our society is that people kind of assassinate with a term. And people don't really understand what critical race theory is, and they're trying, it's like a smoke screen to bury it as if it's not critical to our becoming the kind of country that we want to become. And it is critical race theory. It's critical for us to do it. And those people who are invested in the lie, it's in their best interest to make sure that critical race theory does not take hold and does not become a perspective.
I think it means for all of us, I'm going to go back to community organizing. We need to get together, and we really need to let school boards and other elected officials and even our community know that we believe we need to teach real history, and that it's very important. And our numbers are greater than their numbers. We just have to use them.
Enola, would you agree?
I completely agree with all that's been said. What all we want is the truth, that the truth be taught in our schools. And these fancy terms that are meant, yes, indeed, to obfuscate, they're quite effective. But I think if we're very simple and very clear, we want our children to be taught the truth. I think that'll break through eventually.
And I'd be remiss with not getting to the first question that came up today from Adrian Hoel. Could Marilyn please tell us about the need and role of data in structuring policy and then getting it implemented? Could she also comment on the impact of disparities in education on the social injustice in Bridgeport, where she lived and worked for decades?
I think data is very critical. In every organization I've worked for, data is the foundation of community organizing. It's important to collect the data, to be able to see the scale and the scope of the issue and the problem, and from there work with the community to develop solutions. Education. I'm going to agree with Callie and other panelists. Education is so broken, and we don't yet make it a priority so that every child has access to a quality education. I was very hopeful when I saw teachers organize around the country and go out on strike, and I thought this is going to be the change. And then other things happened and came in, and that movement has not been active. But I think collectively, if we look at things that will make a difference going into the future, education is key, and it's key for all the disinformation that's out there. It's key for so many things, so that again, at the community level, we need to be active. We need to get together in large numbers and demand that there be quality education and that schools in Bridgeport be adequately funded, as well as in Hartford and New Haven and Waterbury. The discrepancy in funding is just eye-opening, and it's horrifying. And the state has yet to address that.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to try to wrap it up. We're going to have one more round of questions, and I'm inspired by a book I just read called We Are the Weather. It's a beautiful and powerfully written book on how to save the planet. Now that seems daunting, right? So many of us feel helpless. The author shows how, by simply eating fewer animal products, like skipping them at breakfast and lunch and consuming them at dinner if you must, we can avert the crisis. In closing, I'd like each of you to recommend some comparably simple action that each of us can take to address the social issues here today. I know that, Callie, you talked about the vote, and we know how important that is and to get it out. Would anyone else of you have another simple action as a takeaway for us?
I think every time I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
I think every time we go to buy something, we need to think twice. We are a consumer throwaway society, and we don't need all the things that we own. And all those things take energy to produce. So I think we can just be very careful. We can look at getting things we already have repaired. They don't have to be beautiful to be useful to us. So I think that's important. And I think also on just an individual level, saving trees is important. There is this huge movement in Seattle to save trees. Everywhere you go, you see a lawn sign that says save our trees. And that's all about every time a developer wants to develop a project, they should not take down trees to do that.
So well said. Pat?
Yes, I'm going to echo what Callie and others have said. It has to be, all of these issues that affect us we have to put them into action and priorities with who we nominate to serve us on all levels of government, local government, statewide, as well as national. We have to nominate the right people, we have to work for the right people, and we have to vote and support them in terms of this policy. Otherwise, it is something that is not immediate for a moment and will get put off. It will not be addressed. It will not be funded. And so it is up to all of us to put this as a top priority in what we do and how we engage civically and follow through with those requests and accountability for action.
Thank you, Pat. Callie?
Yeah, in addition to voting, which is really key, I think that I can speak, as a white person whose practices anti-racism, that, you know, talking to other white people about power hoarding, opportunity hoarding, and selfish, you know, sort of that value system that drives and continues the structures and systems as we know it, you know, is really hard. And it's really hard to do in interpersonal relationships. So like when you have friends over for cocktails, you know, I've certainly been uninvited to parties, you know, because you bring up the tough questions, you engage in a uncomfortable place, you know, but these are the things that must happen if we are going to reimagine society, undo white supremacy in ourselves and in our structures. So I think just having the hard conversations with people.
Thank you, Callie. Enola, as a white woman, what can I do? I mean, she's talked about bringing up the conversations, thinking outside of the box. There's a lot of, you know, conversations online about anti-racism and people, you know, gathering together and not in meaningful ways. What would you tell us?
I would tell you, I would suggest that we at once do a very simple thing, but a very, very deeply complicated thing. That is to look for the lie. The lie really is the thread that runs through the fabric of systemic anti-Blackness. It's everywhere. And we miss it because it is everywhere. We miss it because it has been the environment that we've been swimming in for our whole lives. We've all been born into it. It is the air we breathe. And so the simple thing is to look for the lie everywhere. Look for it in your mind, in your spirit, in your heart. Where does it live? Where does it live in the educational system? Where does it live in housing? Where does it live in arts? Where does it live? And if you think about it as the thread that runs through the whole fabric, then you know the goal is to kind of grab onto that little thread wherever you find it and keep pulling on it. But you can't do anything until you recognize that big chunks of this that we're living, it's a lie. And so we've got to be very alert, always looking for it. Related to that is when you ask where's the lie, what is the truth? That is I think the only way. It's not easy. We can't get out of this with easy, quick fix tips. It's hard.
Thank you.
But well worth it.
So beautifully said. Let's look for the lie, blast it, and then embrace the truth. I think we have to begin to close because I've gone over time, but it's because you're such wonderful people to talk to with doing such important work. I'd like to remind all the people who came on today, would you please fill out the poll? We're looking for more of your participation. And I'd like to, besides thanking all of our guest speakers, thank all of you who attended today. And thanks to the William and Alice Mortensen Foundation and Avangrid Foundation in partner with CNG, SCG, and UI for supporting this series. I hope you'll all join me next month for an enlightening conversation on elder care, a subject that many of us not only know now, but are experiencing firsthand. Thank you once again. I look forward to seeing the Spotlight recipients at next week's 28th Annual Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame induction ceremony and celebration in Hartford. Please look for more details on our website, www.cwhf.com. Thank you once again. I'm looking forward to being with you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Attendees, if you're still on, please fill out the poll. I'm going to leave it up for a little while longer. My guests, you're welcome to click off. Thank you again for joining me today. Thank you all for attending. Please do me a favor and fill out the poll. And I'll see you next month and hopefully next week in Hartford. Thank you again. Thank you. Those of you still on board, we're going to keep our lines open for a minute or so more for you to participate in our poll, our first ever. See, a couple people said they didn't see the questions. I hope they came up on your screen. I know that some of you have because we have quite a few answers. Brianna, you're still on board. Do you see the poll? No, I'm sorry about that. It's our first time up with the poll. No worries. We'll figure it out for next time so that we can better instruct everyone how to see it. Thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you in the future. Have a great afternoon. Bye.